On the program, we're providing some longer-term perspective. Always good when the markets are volatile during periods of time where you see big increases in interest rates, where you see inflation like the current environment. Important to kind of step back and say, okay, well, what's the longer-term perspective on this? And that's certainly what we're going to do in this segment of the program here on Dollars and Cents. So welcome on into the program. We're one of Central Florida's longest-running radio programs. Also happen to be one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. So if you want to hear the program not on a Sunday morning or at your leisure, you can always subscribe to us on one of our many podcast platforms. Go to the one that's you're most familiar with, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or whatever the case may be. You can certainly find our channel there at Nelson Financial Planning, Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris. Any trouble locating us, go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning, and you will see in the upper right-hand corner a bunch of different icons. Click on the one that looks most familiar to you, and voila, you'll get automatically connected to our channel on your podcast platform that you like. Make sure you subscribe to us. That way you know when we upload new information or new material, you'll get an alert. That's how it works. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of folks that stand ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. They also all happen to be certified financial fiduciaries as well. So here's the numbers, if you will. So some interesting numbers to think about. If you look at the markets and where they were on January the 1st of 1993. So that'd be 30 years ago. The Dow opened that year, 1993, at about 3,300. The S&P 500 was 435, and the NASDAQ was 675. Fast forward 30 years, and you've got a Dow that closed the year, last year, at 33,000 and change. The S&P 500 was over 3,800, and the NASDAQ was about 10,500. Now that is the numbers after a relatively bad year where the NASDAQ, for example, went down almost a third. The S&P 500 went down 20%, and the Dow went down 9%. And so at the heels of that bad year, if you look at where those numbers compare to where they were 30 years ago, what you will find is even at the end of that really bad year, the Dow had increased by tenfold. The S&P 500 had increased by ninefold. The NASDAQ had increased by 15-fold. Stop and listen and hear those numbers. Dow had increased by tenfold, S&P 500 by ninefold, NASDAQ by 15-fold over that 30-year period of time. And that's coming at the heels of where all three of them lost a pretty significant amount during the course of 2022. Along the way, let's not forget the headlines. And the headlines are always the reasons that people look at and say, I'm not going to invest. I don't want to invest, or I want to sell everything. And the headlines are what drives it. But folks, the headlines are always here. If you look at the slew of headlines that have happened since 1993, over that same 30-year period of time where the market averages typically increased by over tenfold, 1993, you would have experienced the bombing of the World Trade Center, the first time that happened. In 1994, Orange County, California filed for bankruptcy. Remember that? Some of these counties might be filing for bankruptcy pretty soon, going forward, as all of the tax base is leaving some of these states. But 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing. 1996, there was a budget crisis. It's sort of always a budget crisis in D.C. these days. 1997, avian bird flu. 98, there was a Russian financial crisis. Probably going to be another one of those soon enough because I think they're getting pretty cut off from the rest of the world. 1999, it was Y2K, right? Everything was going to just fall out of the sky there. 2000, bursting of the dot-com bubble. 2001, 9/11, right? 2002, it was WorldCom, Enron, all the collapses of those companies because of bad accounting. 2003, we were in Iraq. 2004, continuation of the war on terror. 2005, Hurricane Katrina. And by the way, we're only like halfway through this 30-year period of time where the markets increased by tenfold. Every one of these years has a slew of headlines. We're just hitting sort of the main ones off the top of our head. Well, not completely off the top of our head. I do have a list here in front of me. I did do some homework. Anyway, the reality is that there's always headlines. There's always distractions. And the reality is that they cause people to make bad decisions with their money, and they forget the fact that, folks, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Whether it's saving for the future or whether it's spending those dollars in retirement, that's not an instantaneous process by any stretch of the imagination. We'll continue. 2006, home prices were sky high. 2007, they all fell back down to life. 2008, the great financial crisis, if you will, followed by 2009, where the market hit a low in March of that year. 2010, poverty rates hit an all-time high. 2011, there was an earthquake and a tsunami in Japan that messed up that nuclear power plant. Hurricane Sandy and the fiscal cliff in 2012. 2013, there was a U.S. government shutdown. See, you can't make this up. Like a lot of these headlines that I've just rattled off that were the main headlines in the particular years going back 30 years, it's kind of aren't we talking about still the same kind of thing? There's always these reasons. There's always these distractions that command our attention but need to be held in perspective. 2014, oil prices went down dramatically. 15, there was an economic slowdown in China. 16, it was Brexit. And then a presidential election. Those come around every 4 years. Don't forget about that. 2017, a bunch of political nonsense. 18 it was a trade war with China. 19 was an impeachment. 20, COVID, right? And another midterm election. 21 was supply chain, and then last year, inflation. And there was a slew of other headlines that happened in every single year just like that. And a lot of similarities. If you think about all of those main events, right? You had terrorism, you had international relations, you had government issues, you had political issues. All of those issues are all percolating in the background. The reality is that there's always reasons to not invest. But if you understand when it comes to how you save your money and how you spend your money, it's not all at once. You're going to spend 30 to 40 years of your life accumulating your savings during your working years. And then, good Lord willing, maybe another 30, 40 years, maybe 30, in retirement, spending those dollars, using those dollars. And that, folks, that's a really long time. So don't get too caught up in today's headlines, whatever they may be. We often talk about them on this program and make that a part of the conversation of, oh, here's what happened last week, here's what happened last month, here's what happened last year. But the reality is, let's not also forget that long-term perspective. The headlines have always been the headlines. They're always there no matter what. Oftentimes the headlines kind of may not be exactly the same, but they kind of rhyme from one year to the next. The reality is, far too often people use them as excuses when it comes to saving and investing and planning. Don't make that same mistake this year. The headlines are always going to be the headlines. The reality is that the journey is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Keep that in mind and keep that perspective on it. With that, we'll take a break. This is Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning.